So Giacomo's a bird, right? Well, if that's the case, then why didn't he just fly Thumbelina back home like she wanted to in the first place? He could have easily searched for the Veil of the Fairies once she's safe at home. Nah, you're probably saying to yourself, the movie would have been over by now if that had happened. But still, Giacomo is a bird. He can fly. You know what? I'm going to start a meme about this. The meme will say, if you want to get some help, then don't call on Giacomo. He's just going to sing and dance the whole time while you're drowning somewhere in a pond. Caution! The following video is an in-depth review of the movie I'm currently reviewing, which means that there will be massive spoilers in the review. If you haven't seen this movie yet, then please feel free to watch this movie first before watching this video. However, if you have already seen this movie, or you just want to know my thoughts on this movie, then keep watching. Thumbelina, or Hans Christian Andersen's Thumbelina, or Don Bluth's Thumbelina, whichever title you want to call this film, was another film that I had reviewed very early on in my movie reviewing career. It was actually the sixth movie that I had reviewed originally in 2011, and it was a movie that I think deserved a revisit. I just have a lot more to say about this movie now than I did years ago, and man did rewatching this film became an odd experience for me. I have a lot of mixed feelings on this movie. On the one hand, there were a couple of things that the movie did to improve more on the original fairy tale that was written by Hans Christian Andersen. However, on the other hand, there were some things that annoyed me a bit in this film that made me cringe. But before we get into all that, I would like to give out a brief summary of this film. The film is about an old woman who wanted a child, and she ended up visiting the village witch to help her with her situation. The witch then gives the old woman a barley corn to plant in her flower pot, and the old woman ended up planting the barley corn. Once the barley corn turned into a flower, a young teenage girl then appears in the flower, and the old woman took in the tiny girl as her own daughter and called her Thumbelina. Not soon afterwards, Thumbelina meets up with a young fairy prince named Cornelius, and she immediately falls in love with him. Prince Cornelius then decides to return back to his parents so that he could tell them that he found the woman that he wanted to marry, and told Thumbelina to wait for his return. While Thumbelina is sleeping, she is suddenly kidnapped by a female toad who turns out to be the mother of Grundle Toad. The mother toad wanted Thumbelina to marry her son Grundle, but Thumbelina didn't want to marry Grundle since she is in love with Prince Cornelius. After that, Giacomo the bird comes to Thumbelina's rescue and manages to take her away from the toads. Thumbelina then makes her goal to return back to her home with her mother, while waiting for Prince Cornelius to come back and take her hand in marriage. Thumbelina has gone down in history as one of the most controversial animated films ever made. Controversial as in the audience just didn't know what to make of this film. The film came out during the time when most of Don Bluth's films were considered flops by the audience, and they didn't seem to hold the same quality as his earlier films like The Secret of NIMH, An American Tail, and The Land Before Time. I was in the camp that didn't know what to make of this film. It seems to me that this film is trying to be faithful to the original fairy tale, and for the most part it is a faithful adaptation to the original fairy tale. However, the film tried to add in some elements that only made the film a bit confusing to follow and cringe-inducing. Like, for example, the film tried to introduce Prince Cornelius much earlier in the film in order to give him more development, which in contrast to the original fairy tale, the prince only showed up in the last few seconds of the story. However, Prince Cornelius and Thumbelina's romance still feels like a stereotypical love at first sight trope that is common in fairy tales. I would have thought that because this movie is much longer runtime than the original fairy tale, they would have spent more time with developing Thumbelina Prince Cornelius' relationship. But the moment that Thumbelina and Prince Cornelius had their Let Me Be Your Wings song number, they just automatically fell in love with each other. In a span of 5 minutes! Yeah, nothing says true love like automatically falling in love with someone in just 1 minute. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. I usually talk about the problems that I have with the film towards the end of my reviews, so I'll just hop into the things that I actually liked about this film. I did like the fact that the movie tried to expand more on the characters from the original fairy tale. Some of the characters like Thumbelina, Giacomo the bird, and Prince Cornelius seem to have a much bigger presence in the film than in the original fairy tale. As I mentioned before, I like the fact that Prince Cornelius was introduced much earlier to the film than the original fairy tale, as we get to see more of his personality in the film. I also like the fact that Giacomo the bird gets more to do in this film, as he was also introduced much earlier in the film compared to the original fairy tale. I also like some of the themes that the film tries to explore, like being yourself, never give up on your goals, and the importance of true love. But probably the best way to explain these themes is through the characters themselves. Thumbelina was at times an interesting character in the film. She is shown as being compassionate and friendly towards other people, but is also a bit naive and has moments of being cynical about a situation. I do like the fact that Thumbelina has flaws in her character, as she is prone to doing everything everyone else tells her to do, even if she doesn't agree with their opinions. It actually makes her character pretty interesting at times, and I was often waiting to see how Thumbelina will react to the different situations that she goes through. I was intrigued with the idea that Thumbelina has a beautiful singing voice, courtesy of Jodie Benson, of course, and the film spends most of its time showing us how the other characters in the film reacted to her singing voice. Like, for example, you have Prince Cornelius, who likes Thumbelina's singing voice, but generally has feelings for Thumbelina, especially when he spends most of the film trying to find Thumbelina after she gets kidnapped by the Toads. Then you have characters like the Toads, the Beetles, and the Mole, who love Thumbelina's singing voice, but don't seem to care about Thumbelina's well-being. Just like Disney's The Little Mermaid, the protagonist's singing voice plays an important role in the film. In The Little Mermaid, Ariel also has a beautiful singing voice, again, also voiced by Jodie Benson. In that film, Ariel falls in love with Prince Eric, and the only thing that Prince Eric remembered about the mermaid he met was her beautiful singing voice. So when Ariel makes a deal with Ursula to take away her voice in order to become a human being to meet Prince Eric had a hard time remembering Ariel due to her losing her voice. In Thumbelina, while Thumbelina has a beautiful singing voice, it often got into trouble as her beautiful singing voice attracted many sleazy characters that she didn't want to deal with, like the Mole and Grundle the Toad. This aspect of Thumbelina's character also shows, and you have to look deep into this, how much the other characters really care about her and whether or not they like her because of her beautiful singing voice or because of her kind nature. Prince Cornelius was another interesting character who actually has more personality than Thumbelina herself. As I mentioned many times before, I like the fact that Prince Cornelius was introduced very early on in the film. This at least attempted to develop his relationship with Thumbelina a bit more, since in the original fairy tale, the prince only met Thumbelina in the last few seconds of the story. I also love the fact that Prince Cornelius is constantly shown as being very cheerful and heroic, as it makes him a pretty likable character. But probably the aspect of his character that I enjoyed the most was that he was one of the few characters in the film, besides Giacomo, who actually cares about Thumbelina for herself and not just for her voice. It shows that Prince Cornelius wasn't as superficial as the supposed villains in this film, since he looked past Thumbelina's singing voice and loved her personality. Giacomo was a complicated character for me. Complicated as in I don't really know what to think of him. On the one hand, he has some good qualities to himself, like he generally does try to help Thumbelina get back home to Prince Cornelius, and he is also one of the few animal characters who like Thumbelina for herself and not just for her beautiful singing voice. However, there's the whole issue about him not, flying Thumbelina back home that we get into much later. Anyway, I do like the fact that Giacomo is always optimistic throughout the film, even when things look pretty bad for Thumbelina. It shows what a good friend he is towards Thumbelina, and I like the fact that he tries to help encourage Thumbelina to keep following her heart, even when Thumbelina feels like giving up. Another thing that I liked about this film was the animation and the songs themselves. The animation was very well done in typical Don Bluth fashion, although I will admit that there were some odd CGI animated sequences that felt a bit out of place in this film. Remember, this film came out in 1994, where CGI animation was still in its early stages of development. I loved how the animation dealt with the characters' expressions, as their facial expressions, especially Thumbelina's and Prince Cornelius's, looked so realistic. But probably the best part of this film was the soundtrack itself. Most of the songs were written by songwriter Barry Manilow, which was beyond impressive, and his songwriting talent easily shines here. I love the songs Let Me Be Your Wings and If You Follow Your Heart, as they easily convey the emotions of the characters involved. The moment I watched the Let Me Be Your Wings segment, I actually enjoyed seeing Thumbelina and Prince Cornelius flying across the pond together and showing their love for each other. I really love the message that the song If You Follow Your Heart sends as it teaches viewers to never give up no matter how difficult the situation gets. The song is energetic enough to get the viewers interested in the song. Now that I talked about the things that I liked about this film, I would like to talk about some of the issues that I had with this movie. And man, were there quite a bit of problems with this film. First of all, I wanted to talk about the most problematic thing about this movie, and that involves the supposed villains themselves. I say supposed because while antagonists like Grundle the Toad, the Mole, and Berkeley Beetle don't really care about Thumbelina's well-being, none of them really strike me as being completely evil. Though probably the most antagonistic villain in this movie is Grundle the Toad, since he does beat up the other characters, and is the one who is the most persistent in getting Thumbelina to marry him. It seems like just because all of them only cared about Thumbelina's beautiful voice and never really considered her feelings, they are the villains of the story. Well, to be fair, they all did try to force a relationship on Thumbelina that she never wanted. And well, forcing a relationship with someone when they don't want to be in a relationship is pretty bad. But in doing this, the villains ended up not being that well developed, and I just didn't really care about their motives throughout the movie. I mean, sure, the antagonist in the original fairy tale were also underdeveloped, but it was justified there since the story wasn't that long to begin with. I know I seem kind of harsh when criticizing this aspect of the film, but I would like to think that because this film is much longer in running time than the source material is based on, it would have spent more time on developing the characters. Another issue that I have with this film is that it seems like it was trying too hard to be like Disney's The Little Mermaid. Now let's count the ways that this film is similar to Disney's The Little Mermaid, shall we? First off, the voice actors in this film are the same voice actors from The Little Mermaid and other Disney animated projects released around that time. So, we have Jodie Benson, who voiced Ariel in The Little Mermaid, voicing Thumbelina herself in this movie. Then we have the late Kenneth Mars, who voiced King Triton in The Little Mermaid, voicing Prince Cornelius' father, the Fairy King, in this film. And finally, we have Gilbert Gottfried, who voiced Iago in Disney's Aladdin, voicing Berkeley Beedle in this film. Okay, so Gilbert Gottfried wasn't in The Little Mermaid, but he was still part of a Disney project at the time. I had mentioned before that both this movie and The Little Mermaid revolve around the lead protagonists having beautiful voices, and how their beautiful voices will often get them into trouble with the antagonist. Now, I understand how successful The Little Mermaid was at the time, and this movie was just trying to replicate that success, but I think that this movie would have been more successful if it didn't try to use the same story elements from The Little Mermaid and just try to do its own thing with Thumbelina's character. I also had a bit of a problem with how Thumbelina was being portrayed in this film. It seems like Thumbelina's only goal in the entire film was to find her way home and marry Prince Cornelius. That's it. Oh, and she also has a beautiful singing voice. All this just made Thumbelina into a one-dimensional character, and I actually wish that the movie gave her more depth than what we are given here. Thumbelina is constantly being taken advantage of by the other characters, and I actually wish that she just stood up for herself. The only time that I saw Thumbelina actually stand up for herself was towards the end of the film when she was about to marry the mole. But then she realized at the last second that she didn't want to marry the mole and actually told everyone that she refused to marry the mole. Then she proceeds to run away from the wedding with the antagonist hot on her heels. This marks the only time where Thumbelina took action to trying to get herself out of a difficult situation. And the last issue that I have with this film, and this one is a long time coming, is about Giacomo not flying Thumbelina home right away. Most of the movie reviewers that had seen this movie had a field day with this. There were many things that I questioned about this situation, like why didn't Thumbelina just ask Giacomo to fly her home? Or why didn't Giacomo offer to take Thumbelina home instead of sending her out into the woods by herself? If it was a gopher, a rabbit, a caterpillar, or any other animal character who can't fly that was helping out Thumbelina, then this would be a problem. Or maybe Giacomo could have tried to fly Thumbelina home when he first met her, but then either he hit a tree or something and he ended up falling to the ground and being separated from Thumbelina in the process while injuring his wing, or somebody threw a rock at his wing and his wing would have been injured, preventing him from flying Thumbelina back home. Wow, I just thought of a smarter way to approach this situation. Thumbelina was rated G. Honestly, there isn't much wrong with the content of this film, since this film is mostly family friendly, which is surprising for a Don Bluth film, as they tend to push the envelope of having some adult themes within the narrative. Originally, I had given Thumbelina a score of a 5 out of 10, but I'm going to be a bit more lenient here and bump the score up to a 6 out of 10. Yes, this film had a lot of problems, especially with how they handled the characters, but it's not completely unwatchable. I mean, I can still rewatch this film whenever I feel like it, and this film does have its good moments like the animation and the songs. However, I think that the film would have fared better if it had just developed the characters a bit more, and if they have just handled some of the situations that the characters got into a little bit better. The whole Giacomo could have flown Thumbelina home argument is pure evidence of that. Hope you enjoyed my review on Thumbelina.
Psst. Hey you. Have you been enjoying the Reviews 2.0 videos? Want to get an added bonus for viewing these videos? Like getting early access to these videos before they are released on YouTube? Or being able to request what movies and TV shows I should review next? Then please feel free to support these videos through my Patreon account. Check out all of the tier titles on my account and choose which tier title you want to be known as. You could become a new member on the block, an early bird, be a part of the future Bunch team, a backstage passenger, an animation superstar, and last but not least, the honorary supreme. So show off your tier title name to the world once you support the Reviews 2.0 videos through Patreon.